Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be talking about the future of content with AI and the one-man media business. Last week I prototyped a V0 of a tool that I plan to use in the future that helps me generate a newsletter draft and accompanying tweets based off of the draft only from a single input that I give to the tool. And we will get into that later in the video, but first I want to talk about the importance of media and code in the modern age. So I am going to pull up a tweet here from Naval Ravikant, and it says, "Code and media are permissionless leverage. They're the leverage behind the newly rich. You can create software and media that works for you while you sleep." And now he wrote this in 2018. This was before ChatGPT. This was before the LLM boom. This was before the image generators got really, really sick. But I think it applies to us even more now today than it did back then when he tweeted it. The reason being is because AI has made it significantly easier for the individual to both code and create content with less work and less time. And this doesn't mean to reduce the quality, but it does mean that you have more time on your hands to improve the quality. So as you can see, media and code are two core pillars for having leverage in the modern age, especially if you're trying to start an internet business. And I would say that I actually think this is going to be a continued trend towards more leverage with these two pillars because there's more and more jobs being lost in the corporate world. And I don't know if a lot of people know this, but I do think I remember, I think it was the Founders Podcast talking about how Cornelius Vanderbilt was actually the person that really kind of pioneered the big corporate entity in the United States and kind of the developed world. But before that, it was family-owned businesses, small businesses, and I think we're going to see a shift back to that just with a new medium, which will be the internet instead of brick and mortar businesses. So now let's look at the demo of this tool. I'll crack into the code a little bit, and then we'll end with some closing thoughts. So let's go. All right, guys, before we get into the code, I just want to give you a high-level overview of how this whole pipeline is working under the hood. So I just kind of sketched up a quick chart to show you what's going on, and I'll also go over some of the blog posts that helped me kind of figure out how to use LangGraph with Langchain and all that good stuff. So the way I have this set up, and I took inspiration from one of Langchain's blog posts where they go over different multi-agent workflows. So there is like a collaborative type of setup where they're all kind of sharing like the same, you think of like they're sharing the same brain or the same scratch pad, so they all have context to the same stuff that's going on. But I opted for more of a hierarchical approach because I want it to be more so like one step after the other. So what I thought of was like, well, maybe we just have a high-level supervisor agent that has two sub-teams, which are the research team and the writer team. And the research team only has one agent right now. It's just the research agent. So it goes and it searches using, I believe it's called the Tavily web API, and it will use that to research stuff on the internet based on the topic that we give it in the beginning. And then it writes up a quick little info write-up for our writing team to use next in the writing draft, and then finally repurpose some of that draft into tweets. So as you can see here, we have the supervisor and then we have the two sub-teams. So these are kind of like, just think of these as like the two, like the three big entities in here is like the main supervisor, and then it has the research team and the writing team, and each of these teams in the graph that we make with LangGraph is kind of like its own like subgraph with its own router for different routing logic. So the researching team is its own subgraph with a specific router for logic that has to do with the research side of things. So if there were more agents, we could maybe add another thing to the router, but the logic is pretty basic for that one. And then on the writing team, it's the same thing. And again, we have a router specific for this. So it might say, well, once we know we're done writing the newsletter draft, then we know that we can go to repurposing next. So that is kind of how the entire flow works at a high level. And then once we're done with that, it'll return all the way back up to the supervisor and it'll say we're done. And that's pretty much how it works. Now, if we come over to Langchain's blog, they have a very nice blog going over LangGraph, and they have another one going over multi-agent workflows. So just to kind of give some basic vocabulary for people watching that aren't familiar with LangGraph, we can kind of go through some of this stuff really fast. If you're not interested in this part, you can just skip ahead. Um, but essentially, like, I just want to kind of talk about what parts of the graph there are. So there's a state graph, which is kind of like it's basically a dictionary that has a shared state of what's going on as you run more cycles in your agent workflow. So this is kind of like how we keep track of what's been said between the agents, who's the sender, and like what's happening at this moment. And so the next component, core component of the graphs in LangGraph are the nodes, and the nodes are one of two things. They're either a runnable interface. So from Langchain Expression Language, which I've done a couple of videos on, the runnable interface is just kind of like this homogeneous interface for making standardized set of calls for LLMs like invoke, a invoke, there's batch call, a batch call, stuff like that. And then the second type of node it can be is a function. So that's actually one of the things we have in our graph as well as a node for calling a tool. And so that's for a agent that wants to know what to do next and it's being routed somewhere. And we know that we want to call a tool next. So that is kind of when you would want to use the tool or like the function as a node instead of an actual runnable interface. And then there's also a special node called end, which you could just import from langgraph.graph, and that just kind of indicates that that is the end of a cycle. And so if this is the last agent to be interacting with something in your graph, then you would make an edge to end after that. And I believe you can have multiple ends because it is a graph, so there could be multiple end states. So the three main types of edges I used in my tool for myself so far are the main entry point, the regular edges, and then conditional edges. A starting edge or an entry point is just where the graph is going to start, so where the input is going to be passed through first. So that would be, for us in this case, it would be the research team, because we always want to start with the research, not the writing. You could always play around with it if you want to, but for me, I usually like to research a bit and then write. The next one are normal edges. So these are things that you know are going to happen one after another. So for me, I'd probably say that after writing the draft, since we don't have any critique agent or anything yet in the writing team, it's just going to go straight to the repurposer agent. So I don't need to have any routing logic for that specifically. I can just say once the draft is done, we know next is to send it to the repurposing agent. And then the final edge, which is kind of like where some of the cool stuff happens, are conditional edges. So this is where you would pass in your the previous node, and then you will pass in the router for that graph, and then the different end states that could come from the router. And so they show an example here. So let's say you're adding a model edge, and should continue would be like a function that has routing logic based on the outputs of the previous run. There will be logic for, oh, I should go to the end, or I should go and call a tool. So that's kind of how it works. So it's like, what is the current node and node that is going to be passing off information, then a routing function, which has logic depending on what your use cases are and what you know you kind of want out of the agents to do next, and then a dictionary of possible next nodes to traverse. And so that's pretty much all of the basic stuff for LangGraph, that at least that I've been using so far. And then compile, of course, is just to compile it. And then once we're done, we run it. And so like for me, I took the example from here, if I can find it. I took this notebook as an example and inspiration, and you'll notice it's actually very similar because that's kind of where I took the inspiration from. So the hierarchical agent teams, I thought this one would be perfect because they seemed like they were doing something similar with research team and writing a document about something. So I thought, hey, newsletters kind of, it's an apple, this is an apple, pretty good comparison. So I stole this concept and this hierarchy scheme for myself, and that's what I am using in my MVP right now. And I will drop both of these blogs in the description below because I think they're super cool and you should definitely check them out. They also link a couple other cool examples and talk about different types of agent workflows like multi-agent collaboration, which I mentioned earlier, and then there's like supervisor agents, etc., etc. So that is kind of the basic overview of what the tool is and a little bit more background into LangGraph because this is kind of the new framework that we're adding on top of other stuff I've used in the past like Langchain and all that good stuff. So without further ado, let's jump into some of the code and then we'll wrap it up and that'll be the video. Okay, so let's just jump right into the code. There's nothing super special about the main file. This is just the Streamlit interface. You can ask ChatGPT to write it up for you in like 5 seconds. But this is the important part right here, this import statement from writer's room, .supervisor agent pipeline, no critique, import run agent pipeline. So let's follow this function and we'll go all the way through the top and I'll explain what's going on as we're doing it. This does no longer need to be here right now, so I'm just going to comment that out because, again, I'm still pushing this forward as I'm making the video, so I don't want to, like, get rid of something if I don't want to get rid of it. But anyways, we're running the agent pipeline, and the user is giving us that user input that we saw in the beginning and in the demo, so this is like where you'll say, I want to write a topic about X, and then we put X in, and we have this call right here to stream all the steps. So we're saying for S in supergraph.stream, and then we pass an array of messages, human message from Langchain's library, and then we pass in the prompt. So we're saying, okay, you have the research information, like research the following topic. Once you have the information, pass it off to the writing team. Here's the topic you should research, and then the topic. So now if we go all the way up, because prepare yourself, guys, this is a mega file of just all of it being built in just one long file. So forgive me for my sins. It was just easier to keep in one file for now. But yeah, so let's go check out the supergraph and we can talk about what's going on here as well. So the supergraph has a state graph, which we've defined above here. So the state is going to keep a list of all the messages that the agents are passing around, and then the next is kind of the name of like what should happen next, and we'll use that in the router logic for this. Once we've done that, we have the adding of the nodes. So these are the two main nodes that we're going to add to the supergraph, which are research team and paper writing team. We pass in a util function of get last message so that we can get the last message from the response so we know what to do next. And then we're passing in the authoring chain and the research chain, which we will talk about those in a second, but those you will find out are essentially the like kind of the subgraphs or like a component of the subgraph that we are joining into the supergraph later. And then we have this other utility function, join graph. So you can see that the join graph function is taking the response in, so the most recent response, and then we're just appending it onto the array of messages in the messages array on the state for the state graph of the supergraph. Then we are adding the supervisor node, which is up here. And this supervisor node takes in a language model and a prompt, and then the names of the teams that it's going to be supervising. And this, I believe, is a helper function up here. We say create team supervisor. Then we have the function route. So we're using function calls because we're going to be using a route function in the routing logic for conditional edges of the graph. And so we want to have this here when we're making the supervisor agent. And I don't really want to go too much more into it because it's going to get more down in the weeds like how it all works. I'm just showing you what I'm doing. But anyways, as we traverse our way back down, bear with me, guys. So we have the supervisor node, and then we're adding the edges. So again, we're saying the edge is going to be research team to supervisor, and then paper writing team to supervisor. So we're connecting both of these to the supervisor, and then we have a conditional edge saying, all right, you can either go to the paper writing team, the research team, or you can end. So, and we just, this is the routing function right here, basically saying whatever is next is what we're going to route to. So it's very basic logic right now. You can make it a bit more complicated if you want to, and as you keep going on whatever project you're using this for. And then we finally set the entry point at the supervisor and compile. So that is the super graph. Now we can talk about both of the sub graphs that we're making. And we'll start with the writing one because that one has at least 2 agents instead of just 1 on the research team, so maybe it's a bit more interesting to talk about that one. And as you can see, it's basically the same thing. I have tools defined up here above all the way up. Like critique content, we're using the @tool decorator, courtesy of Langchain, write draft. And I guess if you guys want to know, for some of these, I'm saving the message to like a local directory here, and then we're later pulling it out from the JSON file that it generates and displaying it on the screen. There's no backend here yet. But anyways, as we go back down to the writing team, we can see that the writing team also has a state, and it's going to be the same thing, except it's going to have this team members array as well. And then we are going to create the writing agent with this create agent helper. And so what we're doing is we're passing in the language model we want to use, we are passing in the tool we want to use, and then the system prompt that we want to use. So create agent, just so you know what is going on here. And now this part right here where we're saying context-aware draft writer agent, and we have this prelude function here. So this is going to check if there's a working directory. If there's not one, we're just going to say that no files are written yet. And if there are, we're going to just say here are the current files that your team has written below. Now, I don't know if I'm necessarily using this at the moment because I've set up my tools in a different way to save the files in a different output folder. So this honestly could be a bit redundant at the current stage that it's at, but I did want to keep it because I think it's going to be helpful as I build it out more. I still have this logic built in, and I can just move it over nicely from what I have currently. And then we create the draft writing node, which is going to essentially take in this agent node function. It's going to take in the agent and the name of the agent. And so it's really important to have these names exactly as you write them, because even the smallest misspelling, capitalization, will have you throw errors because LangGraph will say, oh, like this node doesn't go anywhere, or it's not connected to anything because it's different from what it has compiled if you wrote it somewhere else differently. And so you can see we have another agent we're making, which is the content repurposing agent. Again, passing in the model, passing in the tool we will use, and then we are saying what the system message is. And the same flow again, so you're seeing we're making the context-aware agent, and then we are going to be making the node for that agent. And then we add all the nodes together, so we are adding a node for the draft writing, a node for repurposing, and a node for the supervisor. So the supervisor agent of the writing team. So it's like big agent, 2 sub-agent supervisors, and then sub-agents for that team. So we're over here on the writing team with the writing supervisor. Next, we're going to add an edge. So we want to have an edge connected to the supervisor by all of the agents. And then we are going to have conditional edges that say whatever you should do next. And again, this is because I don't have a critique agent yet. And so if I did have a critique agent, maybe I'd have more complex logic in the routing where instead of it just going to the next agent, it would say, if the output is some specific keyword like not ready, send it back to the writer with the critiques that the critique agent made, and then continue doing that until it's refined enough to then be passed off to the repurposing agent or to be finished. And then we set the supervisor as the entry point, we compile it, and then we make the chain. And so that's basically the process we do for the research team as well for setting up that subgraph. And then again, I already showed you this, but then we add on the layers by creating the higher level supervisor node and agent, and then we have the two sub teams be like the entry points for the sub teams, if that makes sense. And that's pretty much how it all works. Once we have all of that set up, we run it. They are saved to local files again, and I've run this a few times so you can see some of the pipeline outputs. Yeah, so right here you can see it has like the newsletter draft, and then we have all of the tweets right here. And so then those are then again pulled from the local directory and presented onto the screen right here, or on the Streamlit UI on your local host. And so that's really what the whole tool comes down to at the moment. So we start from inputting the topic, send it to the research team. The research team supervisor says, research agent, you're going to research the information, pulls information, makes a quick write-up, passes it back off to the main supervisor. That supervisor is going to give it to the writing team. The writing team supervisor is going to route it to the agent that it sees as best fit for the job. Starts with the writing agent, and then we go to the repurposing agent, and then we are done. And so that's the video, guys. So if you like the video, please drop a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and you can also join My Skool, which is linked in the description below. This community is a free community. It is for educating creators and entrepreneurs on how to leverage AI so they can spend more of their time doing the important stuff like creating more, thinking more, building relationships, and just kind of the human stuff that matters. So if you're interested in that, you can check out the Skool link in the description. And I will also put the GitHub repo for the more technically inclined that want to see that. And yeah, that's really the video. Again, the importance of media and code cannot be emphasized enough at this point in time. Like before, it was already very important for both of those things, to have those things and to leverage them to the best of your ability. But now AI has just made the playing field so large because now there are so many people that have access to all of these tools so they can build faster, ship faster, think faster, learn faster. And it's kind of like, I would say anyone's game right now because a lot of stuff is going on. Again, I said it earlier in the video, but I really do think that we're going to see more small business type businesses come out of the internet as we see more of AI eat away at corporate jobs and humans start to realize, wait, I'm capable of way more than I thought, and I still want to have purpose in my life, and I want to build my own business. And where am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to do it online because that's where everybody is. And AI is going to be one of the most important tools that you have in your tool belt, especially if you're just an individual or you're a small team. This is how we get leverage. This is how we level the playing field. So if you enjoyed the video, again, I appreciate it if you got this far. And until next time, much love and peace, y'all.